Respect isn't optional, it's earned and returned. It's one of those principles that sounds simple, but it's the foundation of how we treat each other, how we define decency, and how we hold ourselves accountable in a world that often forgets what dignity looks like. In moments like the one with the veteran and his service dog, respect becomes more than a word. It becomes a mirror reflecting who we really are when no one is grading our behavior. When someone walks into a room wearing the weight of their past, the medals, the scars, the quiet posture of someone who has seen more than most could imagine, the least the world can offer is respect. Not pity, not attention, but acknowledgement. That acknowledgement says, I see you. I know what you've done mattered. Respect is not about bending rules or special treatment. It's about understanding the human story standing in front of you. The veteran didn't ask for applause. He didn't ask for recognition. He simply wanted a place to stay for the night, with his service dog, the partner who probably saved him in more ways than one. But instead of understanding, he got a bill. A fee that said, we don't see your service. We see a problem. That moment wasn't about money. It was about meaning. Respect was missing, and when respect disappears, everything else starts to fall apart. Respect is not something you demand. It's something you live. It's in the tone of your voice when you speak to someone who can't give you anything in return. It's in the patience you show when someone moves slower, hears less, or struggles to explain themselves. It's in the quiet decisions you make, the ones no one ever notices. Respect doesn't shout. It shows up quietly, like a service dog sitting at his master's side, steady, dependable, and loyal no matter what's happening around them. What happened in that hotel lobby wasn't just a mistake in customer service. It was a small failure of humanity, a disconnect between policy and principle. Somewhere along the line, rules became more important than reasons, and procedures replaced empathy. That's what happens when respect is treated like a formality, when it's something you offer only to people who look or act a certain way. But true respect doesn't work like that. It doesn't depend on titles, appearances, or social status. It doesn't care about uniforms, money, or medals. It's a choice we make every single time we interact with another person. The veteran's reaction wasn't about anger. It was about disappointment. Because when you've faced combat, when you've seen loss and survived chaos, the last thing you expect to fight for is basic decency in your own country. For him, respect was supposed to be the one thing that didn't need to be earned twice. But that moment in the lobby reminded everyone watching that respect is fragile when people stop practicing it. The truth is, we've grown used to treating respect like a reward instead of a requirement. We give it to people when they impress us, when they fit our expectations, when they follow the script. But respect isn't something we hand out like points. It's supposed to be the default setting. It's supposed to guide us before we make judgments, before we open our mouths, before we decide how someone should be treated. When the lights went out in that hotel 7 minutes later, it wasn't just electricity that failed. It was a symbolic reminder that when respect disappears, darkness follows. Maybe that blackout wasn't planned, but it was poetic. Because the absence of respect always leads to blindness to humanity, to empathy, to understanding. Every person carries their own kind of service dog, metaphorically speaking, something that helps them move through the world, something others might not see or understand. For some, it's a real animal. For others, it's a struggle, a memory, a pain they don't talk about. Respect means recognizing that you don't know everyone's story and acting with kindness anyway. In every interaction, respect either builds bridges or burns them. The difference comes down to whether we see people as obstacles or as human beings with their own burdens. The clerk at the desk saw a policy. The veteran saw a lack of recognition. And in between those two perspectives lies the simple truth. Respect is what connects people when rules fail. That's why it's not optional. It can't be something we apply only when convenient or profitable. Because respect, once lost, doesn't come back easily. It takes awareness, humility, and sometimes a moment of darkness to remember why it matters so much. When we start treating others, especially those who've already sacrificed so much, with genuine respect, we restore something that's been missing for too long, our shared sense of humanity. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes, they walk quietly with service dogs. The image of a hero has been painted for generations as someone standing tall in a battlefield, medals glinting in the sun, courage visible and loud. But in real life, heroism is often quieter, less dramatic, and deeply personal. It doesn't announce itself when it enters a room. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply exists, steady, calm, and often invisible to those who aren't paying attention. A veteran walking with a service dog doesn't draw attention because he wants to. He does it because he needs to. That leash connecting them is more than a simple tether. It's a lifeline. The dog isn't a pet. It's a partner trained to sense anxiety before it spirals, to stand guard against panic, to remind its human that the world is still safe. Each step they take together tells a story of survival, of battles fought long after the war ended, of courage that doesn't fit neatly into parades or ceremonies. The truth is, we have a narrow idea of what heroism looks like. We picture it in uniforms, medals, and headlines. But most heroes move among us unnoticed, the ones who wake up every day and fight battles no one sees. They don't fight for glory. They fight for stability, for peace, for one more day of normal. The veteran with his dog isn't just a symbol of bravery. He's a reminder that the hardest wars are often fought in silence. When the hotel clerk looked at the man and his service dog, what she saw was policy, a pet. What she missed was the bond between them, the years of training, the nights when that dog probably nudged his owner awake from nightmares that would have swallowed him whole. The kind of partnership that doesn't need words, just understanding. But that's what happens when people forget that heroes come in all forms. Respect becomes selective. Empathy gets filtered through misunderstanding, and the everyday hero gets reduced to an inconvenience. The man didn't need anyone to thank him. He didn't walk in expecting special treatment. He just wanted to rest, like anyone else. But that's the thing about quiet heroes. They rarely ask for what they deserve. They've already given enough. They carry a kind of humility that society often mistakes for weakness. They've seen the worst and survived it, and now all they want is to move through life without having to explain their scars. The service dog by his side wasn't decoration or comfort alone. It was part of his recovery, his connection to the world. That animal had likely saved him from isolation, anxiety, or even something darker. When someone questions that, when someone slaps a price tag on it, it's not just a financial insult. It's emotional. It says, we don't see what you've been through. We only see what we can charge for. That's the kind of oversight that cuts deeper than words, because it reveals how disconnected we can become from empathy. Heroes like him don't get to leave their battles behind when they come home. They live with reminders in their bodies and minds every single day. And the service dogs that walk beside them are proof that healing doesn't happen alone. These dogs aren't just trained animals. They are extensions of their handlers, living embodiments of trust, protection, and patience. They are silent witnesses to pain and progress, carrying a weight that most can't even comprehend. In that moment, standing at the front desk, the veteran was facing a new kind of battle, one that didn't involve weapons or commands, but misunderstanding and indifference. And that's often how heroes are tested after their wars are over. They return to a society that praises them in theory, but sometimes fails them in practice. They're told they're valued, but when they need compassion, bureaucracy steps in. When they need understanding, they're met with ignorance. That contradiction is one of the quiet tragedies of modern heroism. The world needs to remember that not all courage is loud. Not all service ends when the uniform comes off. Heroism is the nurse who keeps showing up for double shifts, the firefighter who checks in on his team after the fire is out, the teacher who stays late to help a struggling student, the veteran who fights invisible battles and still manages to smile at strangers. Heroism is ordinary people doing extraordinary things, often without recognition, often without anyone knowing how much it costs them to keep going. The veteran and his dog didn't need applause when they entered that hotel. They just needed understanding. They needed someone to see beyond the surface and recognize the bond that keeps a man like him standing tall despite everything he's endured. But that's the challenge, to see heroism where it doesn't announce itself, to respect courage that doesn't demand attention. Because heroes aren't always in uniform. Sometimes, they're just people who keep walking, step by step, with a loyal companion by their side, trying to make peace with a world that still doesn't fully understand the price they've already paid. Ignorance can turn into a lesson faster than you think. It often starts with something small, a careless word, a dismissive look, a misunderstanding that feels harmless in the moment. Most of the time, ignorance isn't born from cruelty, but from not knowing better, from not taking a second to understand what's really in front of us. But the thing about ignorance is that it never stays quiet for long. It has a way of exposing itself, of forcing people to see what they've missed, especially when it collides with truth. In that hotel lobby, the ignorance wasn't loud or aggressive. It was polite, procedural, wrapped in customer service language. A simple, "That'll be an extra charge for the dog, sir." The kind of sentence that might sound normal to anyone else, but in that moment, it revealed everything that was wrong. The person behind the desk didn't see a veteran with a service dog. They saw a man with a pet. They didn't see a relationship built on necessity and trust. They saw a policy violation. It wasn't intentional malice. It was the kind of ignorance that comes from not taking the time to know what service dogs are, what they represent, and who they serve. Ignorance, in moments like that, strips away dignity. It reduces someone's story to a category on a checklist. And that's where the lesson usually begins, when someone realizes too late that their routine action has collided with another person's reality. 7 minutes later, when the lights went out, that hotel got a taste of how quickly ignorance can shift from comfort to consequence. Because lessons have a way of finding their way to the surface when empathy has been ignored for too long. The hotel clerk didn't know who she was talking to. She didn't know the weight of that man's experience or the meaning behind the leash he held. That's how ignorance operates, in the absence of awareness, in the quiet assumptions that shape how we treat others. Most people who commit these small acts of disrespect aren't evil, they're uninformed. But when ignorance meets pride, when someone refuses to see past their own assumptions, that's when it becomes dangerous. It's no longer just about not knowing. It's about choosing not to learn. In that sense, ignorance isn't just a lack of information. It's a lack of curiosity. It's the refusal to ask why, or who, or what if. It's easier to rely on what's familiar, to stick to policy, to avoid stepping outside the script. But growth doesn't happen inside comfort zones. It happens when we get things wrong, when we face the consequences of our assumptions, and when we allow those moments to change us. The hotel staff learned that the hard way. One moment they were following routine, and the next they were standing in darkness, realizing that not every mistake can be fixed with an apology. The veteran, on the other hand, probably wasn't surprised. People like him have dealt with that kind of ignorance before, the kind that doesn't come from hatred, but from the world forgetting to pay attention. He likely didn't raise his voice or argue. That's the quiet patience of someone who's seen far worse. But the lesson wasn't for him. It was for everyone watching, everyone who thought they understood respect, but hadn't practiced it. Because ignorance doesn't just affect the person who commits it. It affects everyone who witnesses it and chooses whether to stay silent or to learn. In every society, ignorance exists in different forms. Sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's generational, and sometimes it's simply human. People grow up thinking they understand the world, only to find out they've been looking at it through a narrow lens. The test comes in what they do next. Do they defend their ignorance out of pride, or do they let it become a lesson that changes how they see others? The hotel story is a snapshot of that choice, a reminder that awareness often begins in moments of discomfort. We like to think lessons come gently, that people can be guided into understanding through reason alone. But real lessons rarely arrive that way. They come through moments that sting, that humble us, that leave us standing in the metaphorical dark, realizing we could have done better. Ignorance isn't something you fix once. It's something you keep working against every day. It takes attention, empathy, and a willingness to admit you were wrong. That's what makes the moment so powerful. In less than 10 minutes, What started as a routine transaction turned into a moral checkpoint. A hotel that ran on rules was suddenly forced to reckon with reality. A man who'd already sacrificed more than most had to face yet another misunderstanding. And somewhere in between, a silent truth emerged. Ignorance has a short shelf life when it meets experience. The light going out wasn't just physical darkness. It was a symbol of awareness being forced into existence. Ignorance thrives in the light of assumption, but the moment the power cuts out, literally or metaphorically, people start to see what they've been missing. They start listening differently, thinking differently, realizing that what they dismissed as no big deal was, in fact, the point. Because every act of ignorance carries a lesson waiting to be learned, and it's only a matter of time before that lesson makes itself impossible to ignore. Compassion should be policy, not an afterthought. It shouldn't depend on who's standing in front of you or how busy your day is. Compassion is the core of what makes any interaction human. It's the invisible current that turns service into kindness, routine into respect, and a simple transaction into something meaningful. Yet, too often, compassion gets lost in the machinery of policy. People are trained to follow rules, to check boxes, to protect procedures, and somewhere in that process, the human element gets left behind. When the veteran stood at that hotel counter with his service dog, he wasn't looking for sympathy or special treatment. He was looking for understanding. But what he got instead was a mechanical response, a reminder that policy had more authority than empathy. That'll be an additional charge for the dog. A sentence that sounds neutral on the surface, but carries weight when aimed at the wrong person. It was a sentence that should never have been said, not because the employee meant harm, but because the system she worked in didn't make compassion a rule. It made it an option. That's the problem with the way many systems operate. Compassion is treated as a bonus feature, something you add when convenient, not something you lead with. People in customer service, healthcare, education, and public spaces are often told to be efficient, consistent, and compliant. Those are good goals, but they mean nothing if compassion isn't part of the foundation. Because efficiency without empathy turns people into case numbers, and consistency without care turns fairness into coldness. The world doesn't need more policies. It needs policies with heart. If compassion were policy, that moment in the hotel lobby would have gone differently. The clerk would have seen the service dog and known immediately what it meant. She would have greeted the veteran with the respect he deserved and the understanding his companion required. There would have been no awkward confrontation, no tension, no insult disguised as procedure. Compassion as policy would have prevented the entire misunderstanding before it began. That's the power of empathy when it's built into the system instead of added after the damage is done. When compassion is missing from policy, people start to rely on the excuse of just doing my job. It becomes a shield for indifference, a way to avoid responsibility for the human consequences of our decisions. But doing your job shouldn't mean silencing your conscience. Doing your job should include the responsibility to treat others with basic decency, even when the rulebook doesn't spell it out. Compassion doesn't slow down efficiency, it gives it direction. It reminds us that we're dealing with people, not processes. The veteran's experience wasn't unique. Every day, people face similar situations, from hospitals to airports to schools, where the system forgets that the people it serves are human beings, not entries in a database. A mother being told she filled out the wrong form. A patient denied care because of a technicality. A worker disciplined for following their heart instead of the manual. These are all signs of systems that prioritize control over care. Compassion shouldn't have to fight for space inside those structures. It should be the framework that holds them up. The irony is that true compassion doesn't cost anything. It doesn't require new software, extra training, or special approval. It just requires awareness, the willingness to pause, to look someone in the eye, and to treat them as if their story matters. That kind of compassion can't be scripted, but it can be taught. It can be built into policies that remind people that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. The hotel clerk didn't fail because she lacked manners. She failed because her training probably didn't include empathy as a non-negotiable skill. If compassion were treated as policy, it would change how organizations define success. Instead of only measuring numbers, they'd measure impact. Instead of focusing on compliance, they'd focus on connection. The small, human decisions, the ones that make people feel seen and respected, would carry as much weight as profit margins and performance reviews. And that would create workplaces and communities that don't just function but actually care. The hotel incident shows what happens when compassion is treated like a side note. The power outage that followed might have been coincidence, but it served as a fitting metaphor. Without compassion, systems go dark. They lose their warmth, their purpose, their ability to connect. Policies alone can keep the lights on, but only compassion can make people feel welcome inside. When the human touch disappears, so does trust. In the end, compassion isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It sees beyond rules to the reasons those rules exist. It recognizes that service is about more than transactions. It's about relationships. Every policy written without compassion leaves a gap, and in that gap, misunderstanding grows. The veteran's story isn't just about one mistake. It's about a world that still struggles to balance order and empathy. And until compassion stops being an afterthought and becomes a built-in expectation, moments like that will keep happening, teaching the same hard lesson again and again. Moments reveal character more than medals do. Medals tell a story of what someone has done. Moments show who they really are. In the flash of an unexpected encounter, when there's no audience, no script, and no one watching closely, a person's true nature surfaces. It doesn't need time or ceremony, just a choice. The veteran standing at the hotel counter had already lived through years of choices under pressure, the kind that earn medals and headlines. But the hotel clerk had a moment of her own, a chance to show who she was when faced with something she didn't understand. And that's the difference between recognition and revelation. Medals record history. Moments write truth. The veterans' medals represented valor and sacrifice, earned in places where survival depended on quick thinking, courage, and loyalty. They were symbols of endurance, of the kind of discipline that only war can teach. But those medals couldn't speak for him in that lobby. They couldn't explain his service dog, or the quiet strength that came from years of managing invisible wounds. The only thing that could tell his story in that moment was how people treated him, not because of what he had done, but because of who he was now. That's where character enters the scene, in the split second when someone decides between empathy and apathy. Moments like that strip away pretense. They don't allow time for reflection or performance. The clerk wasn't given an hour to decide how to respond. She had seconds, and in those seconds, the world tilted. She could have chosen compassion, but she chose procedure. That's not unusual. It's how most people react when their instincts are guided by training rather than understanding. But moments like those test not the rules we follow, but the values we carry. They measure whether we lead with empathy or with indifference, whether we see people as individuals or as tasks. Character isn't built in comfort. It's revealed in conflict. It shows up when we're forced to choose between what's right and what's easy. For the veteran, his moment wasn't about defending himself. It was about restraint, about holding his composure when he was disrespected by someone who didn't know his story. His calmness was his strength. For the clerk, her moment was a mirror, a reflection of how easily we can forget humanity when we're busy protecting policy. She didn't see herself as cruel, but that's what makes moments like this so powerful. They don't announce themselves as moral tests. They sneak up quietly and expose what lies beneath. In life, medals fade. The shine dulls, the ribbons fray, and they become artifacts of past glory. But moments of character, those live forever, in memory, in reputation, in the stories others tell. People rarely remember awards. They remember how you made them feel. The veteran probably didn't expect anyone to notice him. He didn't walk in wearing pride. He walked in wearing humility. And that humility was met with indifference, which turned a simple check-in into a defining moment for everyone involved. What makes moments so revealing is their honesty. There's no preparation, no rehearsed response. You can't plan how to act when compassion is suddenly required. You either have it in you or you don't. And when that switch flips, when the truth comes out in a glance or a gesture, you see a person's foundation. That's why character can't be faked. It's not about appearances or accomplishments. It's the instinctive response when no one's keeping score. The veteran's strength didn't come from medals. It came from endurance. The ability to stay composed in the face of ignorance, to let his actions speak louder than his frustration, to allow the situation to teach others without needing to lecture them. That's a rare kind of grace, one that doesn't demand recognition but earns it naturally. In contrast, the hotel's reaction revealed a kind of weakness disguised as professionalism. It showed how easy it is to follow policy and still fail the test of decency. Moments also reveal the unseen side of power. The clerk had control over the situation. She had the authority to decide whether to charge the man or not. That tiny fragment of power became the stage where her character was tested. Power, when placed in the wrong hands, can shrink empathy. It convinces people that authority excuses insensitivity. But true power, like true character, shows itself through restraint. The ability to choose kindness even when the rules give you permission not to. The darkness that followed, the power outage that swept through the hotel, wasn't just physical. It was symbolic. A reminder that when character fails, everything else loses its light. The blackout forced people to pause, to sit in silence with the weight of what had just happened. It's in those quiet, uncomfortable spaces that lessons sink in. Because when everything stops, reflection begins. And in that pause, people see their actions for what they truly are, stripped of excuses. Every person will face moments that define them, moments where they have to decide who they are when no one is guiding them. Those moments are small but unforgettable. They don't come with applause or medals, but they shape legacies far more deeply. The veteran already knew that. His life had been a series of moments under pressure, moments that had tested and refined his character until it became something unbreakable. The hotel staff learned it too, even if they didn't realize it right away. Because moments like that have a way of echoing, reminding us long after they pass that character isn't proven by what we show the world. It's proven by what we do when the world isn't watching. Never underestimate the power of doing what's right, even when no one's watching. It's easy to act with integrity when people are paying attention, when praise or recognition might follow, but the real measure of a person is what they choose to do in silence. Doing the right thing doesn't always come with applause or reward. Sometimes it comes with resistance, misunderstanding, or even consequences. But that's what makes it powerful. It's the quiet courage that separates convenience from conviction, the decision to hold your ground when compromise seems easier. The veteran in that hotel didn't demand special treatment. He didn't raise his voice or argue. He knew what was right, and he stood by it with quiet strength. He had every reason to fight back, every reason to call out the injustice, but instead, he let his dignity do the talking. That's what doing the right thing looks like, not showy or loud, but steady and clear. The staff, on the other hand, had their own choice. They could have done the right thing in that moment by showing compassion, by recognizing his service dog for what it was, by honoring his rights without hesitation. But they didn't. They hid behind policy, behind the comfort of rules, and in doing so, they missed a chance to prove their humanity. Doing what's right often means stepping outside the script. It means being willing to question a rule if it conflicts with respect or empathy. It means being brave enough to say, "This doesn't feel fair," even when you're expected to stay quiet. The clerk might have been following procedure, but following rules blindly isn't the same as doing right. Procedures keep systems running, but principles keep societies human. Every moment we choose to do the right thing, even in small ways, we push back against the indifference that tries to take over. What makes doing the right thing powerful is that it doesn't always make sense to everyone else. Sometimes it looks unnecessary or inconvenient. It might mean standing up for someone you don't know, defending someone when it's easier to stay neutral, or admitting a mistake before anyone notices. Those acts often go unseen, but they build integrity like layers of armor. The veteran's composure in the face of ignorance wasn't weakness, it was moral strength. He didn't need to prove a point because his behavior already did. In contrast, the hotel's response showed how doing the wrong thing, even out of ignorance, can spread quickly, leaving behind embarrassment, guilt, and regret. The blackout that followed was more than just coincidence. It was a moment of pause, of forced reflection. It made everyone stop and sit in the dark, both literally and metaphorically. Maybe for the first time that day, they thought about what had just happened. Sometimes the universe has a strange way of balancing the scales, not through punishment, but through perspective. In the dark, people listen to their conscience more clearly. They feel the weight of what they could have done differently. That silence can be the loudest teacher of all. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. It can make you uncomfortable, isolate you, or make others question your motives. But the truth is, the reward isn't in the reaction. It's in knowing that you stayed true to your values. Integrity doesn't need witnesses. It needs conviction. Every time someone chooses honesty over convenience or compassion over pride, they strengthen the fabric that holds communities together. When people stop caring about doing what's right, society starts to erode, not all at once, but slowly, in everyday decisions that prioritize comfort over conscience. The veteran's story is proof that doing what's right doesn't require an audience. It requires a sense of purpose. His life was built around doing the right thing even when it was dangerous, even when no one would ever know the full extent of his sacrifice. That habit doesn't go away when the uniform does. It becomes part of who you are. And that's what separates principle from performance. Some people act right when it's expected, others live right because it's who they are. When people in positions of service, leadership, or authority remember the power of doing what's right, everything changes. A single act of fairness or empathy can shift an entire culture. It can turn an ordinary moment into something memorable. Imagine if every hotel, business, or organization taught its employees that doing what's right matters more than sticking to policy. Imagine the ripple that would create: fewer misunderstandings, more trust, more humanity. That's what happens when integrity stops being optional. In the end, the moments that define people rarely happen on stages or under bright lights. They happen in small decisions: a choice to listen, a choice to help, a choice to stand firm. Doing what's right is powerful precisely because it doesn't depend on recognition. It lives in the quiet spaces between choices, in the seconds where no one's watching but your conscience. The lights may have gone out that night, but something else switched on: awareness. Awareness that rules without heart fail, that silence without justice is hollow, and that no matter how dark it gets, doing what's right always finds its way to light.